I have them timed. I'm glad I lifted the restrictions.
Yes.
Usually they're 2 hour thing. Take whatever time you need.
I remember doing the quizzes for that, and the timer was still on it 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think there was one that was in it.
I've
One
become
question
more,
left of 10
I've
minutes.
become more forgiving in my old age, as it were. So, welcome back. We just took our 10-minute break. It's we have an hour left to go, a little bit over an hour to go with the class. What I want to talk about now, we've had this conversation about what is interpretation, and do we have an answer yet? What is the answer to interpretation? Is it simply well, we know it's not, I get to do whatever I want, right? It's making musical decisions, isn't it? Interpretation is making musical decisions to add extra musical ideas to the music to make the performance more meaningful. Don't ask me to repeat that because I won't state it the same way. And we know that as performers, we are allowed, and in fact expected, to do this, aren't we? We are expected to bring life to this music that's on the page. In conducting terms, we often refer to ourselves as the composer's advocate. There's an author by the name of Leonsdorf who coined that term. In fact, his book is The Composer's Advocate. And he talks about interpreting and what your right is of interpretation. You know, in a tome, a book about this thick, and you know, some of it is deriding other composers or other conductors for their interpretation. My thought on the subject is just this. As musicians, we're all required to bring out what we find is beautiful in the music that we perform and that we bring to ourselves, to our musicians, to our audience. And so if we are searching for that beauty in music, we know that we do that through our training, through our theoretical knowledge, our historical knowledge, our performing knowledge. And all those things combined come together so that we can do something artful, more artful. And isn't that really the beauty of music? Because we can all find something different. Now, I can tell you as a composer, and there are basically, you know, to overgeneralize, two schools of thought on this. As a composer, I know that when I release a piece of music to the public, it's like giving birth to a child. I'm going to let that child go out and be who it wants to be in the hands of people who hopefully treat the music with respect and try to find something beautiful in it. And so if somebody comes back to me and takes one of my band scores and says, "Oh, I love that one section. That underlying line is so cool, and I really bring it out in my performance." Well, I can enjoy that too, even if that was not what I envisioned needed to be to the fore. I can rejoice at what someone else found appealing and how they bring that. If they do it artfully, if they can do that smoothly, then I can enjoy that performance. There are other composers, however, who say, "Don't touch my music. Do exactly what's on the page." And some modern composers have gone to the point where everything is marked. Articulation, dynamic, crescendos, decrescendos, tempos, I mean, just explicitly all over the place. Well, by golly, I'm going to try to do what's on the page for them as the composer's advocate. But sometimes it's impossible. There's a composer who wrote dance movements, Philip Sparks, who is very explicit about what he writes. So you have to do it this way. And then in the next sentence he'll say, "Of course, when I do this, I do it all on finale, and the computer can do anything that I write." And so in his movement, dance movements, his second movement is supposed to be this almost, it's a reel. It's almost like an Irish reel. And very articulated in the woodwinds, slur two, tongue two kinds of things, moving lines, you know, these little rainbows, as Sols would call them. And he marks it at like 144. And if you play it at that tempo, it sounds nothing but frenetic. It does not sound like a reel. It does not dance. It slam dances maybe, but it does not dance. And so there are many things that influence success in music, which brings us to musical truisms. the things that we have to attend to. We're going to attend to tempo markings, right? We're going to try to. But if somebody says andante and marks it 126, I'm going to look a little askew at that, because andante does not cover up to 126. Walking tempo, right? And we know with all those terms for andante, vivace, pesante, you know, we all know the metronomic markings. There's great variation in there, isn't there? Great variation in there. So how do I know which one to choose? That's something that's interpretive that we have to do. So what are some of the musical truisms that you guys know and that you apply to music? First of all, what is a truism?
Something that happens every time across most music.
It's a given truth, right? Anytime we see it, we just automatically do it. We don't even have to speak it. We know it. You know, it's innate.
Yeah.
So a musical truism is something that happens all the time. It's a natural thing, and it's so obvious that you don't have to repeat it. So why am I making you repeat musical truisms? Mostly because people have forgotten them. Okay, and they're a huge part of interpretation. So I'll give you an example. When a line ascends, we can crescendo. That's a musical truism. When a line goes higher, we can enhance that by crescendoing, building our volume through the peak of that line. It's not to say you can't do the opposite, but the most common thing is to crescendo through an ascending line. So, what is another musical truism?
Music get quieter as you go lower.
Right, so when lines go down, we can diminuendo. When lines descend, we can diminuendo. Once again, musical truisms are not do it all the time. They are the most common way of treating a line. Because I can give you tons of examples where putting a diminuendo on an ascending line is a great way of enhancing its meaning. Okay, what else?
Slowing down when you approach a fermata.
Okay. Whether it's written or not, that's the most common way to approach a fermata. Why? Well, you don't come to a stop sign and go, right? You've got to, yeah, sometimes we do, maybe. You kind of slow down a little bit, and you know, there's the California stop, kind of roll through. There's all kinds of approaches to that fermata, right? But we know that slowing to a fermata, whether it's written or not, is usually a productive, good approach. Now, aren't there times when you don't slow to a fermata? Of course. There are some times where you charge into a fermata. Sure, great. So there are always exceptions to these rules. Musical truisms are overarching guides, right? Okay. What's another musical truism?
Varying dynamic and/or articulation on a repeat.
Okay.
Depending on the era. Thinking classical here.
Well, yes, and almost anywhere. Never state the same thing the same way. Now, Charles, was it you that just said volume to it? Yeah, you're absolutely correct. However, this is where interpretation can even say, I can mess with the articulation that was written. Just sometimes the articulation was put in by an editor or someone else, okay? But if I want to enhance meaning, now, you'll notice that almost all of these things come from human nature. For example, never state the same thing the same way. Never state the same thing the same way. Never state the same thing the same way. Why do we do that? Same words. If I wrote those to you, if I was writing a book, and you were to read that, and you saw that statement 3 times, I bet you wouldn't even read it the same way.